welcome your 2012 GA co-chairs, Linda Adler-Hurwitz and Janine Fiddler.
Welcome to the 2012 JFNA General Assembly, where the Jewish community downloads, uploads, and shares. We are so proud to be hosting all of you in our hometown of Baltimore. It takes more than a hurricane to stop the GA. Every GA has its challenges, but none of us expected the devastation of Hurricane Sandy, with 7-foot-high floods and days of no electricity, heat, phones, and internet less than 2 weeks before this premier conference. The host community of Baltimore and the JFNA national staff, based in downtown Manhattan, worked tirelessly under incredibly difficult conditions to get us ready for this day. We are so grateful that we have all weathered the storm safely. Our hearts go out to so many, many people who have suffered losses and continue to endure hardships.
The entire GA team worked for over a year to create a program showcasing what we do as a collective, JFNA together with local federations. Hurricane Sandy highlights the special way our system responds to emergencies. In less than 2 weeks, Jewish federations, through JFNA, raised over $1 million to help the victims of Hurricane Sandy. And it is in this room, it is here right now. I am certain that the energy is partly the product of the many young people participating in this year's GA. We have over 320 college students and 100 high school students joining us. You rock. For the first time, we created a special institute for Hillel students, which took place earlier today. Our programming includes a track designed in consultation with young people to explore their interests and concerns. Here in Baltimore, we reached out to young adults, inviting them to events to promote the GA and connecting them as a group to ideas percolating across the country.
In keeping with the GA theme, we are also emphasizing social media and technology. We encourage all of you to blog, tweet, update, and download your impressions, your ideas, and your defining moments. What happens at the GA does not stay at the GA. We, as a people, need each of you to be the nucleus from which all that you learn, share, and synthesize ripples from one Jew to another, from one community to another. Go to town, sharing with your network the best practices, concepts, and factual information that move you and make you think out of your comfort zone.
Developing this year's program, our touchstone was to emphasize the speakers. We believe we have the best speakers and presenters throughout the program.
Yes, we do. I know I speak for every Baltimorean as we welcome you, our cherished guests, with our Southern hospitality, our Hamisha warmth, and our downright charm.
Please welcome the GA's 2012 Scholar in Residence and President of the Union for Reform Judaism, Rabbi Rick Jacobs.
Thank you. I am honored to be here with all of you, and thank you for inviting me. As a denominational leader serving as your scholar in residence, I could feel just a little bit out of place, kind of like a Yankees fan at Fenway. Or this year, maybe at Camden Yards. Because for a very long time, the Federation world and the synagogue world were rivals, but no longer. No, today we face so many common challenges. We face so many common challenges that we are wise to put our heads together to forge a path toward a bright Jewish future. And we are all, Federation and synagogue leaders alike, asking the very same questions. Why aren't our young people more like us? I mean, why aren't they joining synagogues? Why don't they give to their federations? Why don't they stand up for Israel? Why don't they go to Hillel? In short, why can't they be dedicated and committed Jews just like us? But friends, these are not new questions. Since Abraham and Sarah, the drama and uncertainty remain. Will the next generation take its rightful place in the chain of tradition? Will our children care? Will they shoulder their share of Jewish responsibility? As this week's Torah portion opens, there is no next generation. Isaac and Rebekah are panicked that the divine promise will expire with them. But sure enough, they are blessed with progeny, Jacob and Esau. One loved Hebrew school, the other preferred lacrosse. One was dying to get his hands on that birthright. The other one couldn't care less. We know these boys. They belong to us, all of us. And yet they remain a giant question mark in the ongoing saga of our people. We who are blessed to serve as the leaders of the organized Jewish world, we're a lot like Rebekah and Isaac. We're wondering what to do with our young, how to help them understand the majesty of our tradition, the power of our values, and the strength of our community. We know that the majority of Jewish youth in their teens, 20s, and 30s are not jumping on the Jewish bandwagon. The recent Pew study, Nuns on the Rise. And when I say nuns, I'm not talking about the wonderful women who walk around in black and white habits. I mean nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And this Pew study found that a growing number of our young, like those of other faiths, are nuns, people with no religious affiliation. Many of us in this hall believe most of these nuns, they don't know and they don't care about being Jewish. But it is not that simple. Some don't care much at all. But others do care, even deeply, about their Jewish identity and their Jewish spirituality. What they have in common is this: they have not found, and we have not shown them, compelling, vital Jewish institutions that are relevant to their lives. We will succeed only if we can forge this new Jewish future together. And let us not give up on Jacob or Esau or on Amanda, Noga, Svetlana, Eduardo, Jaden, Melissa, and so many other young Jews. They may not express their Judaism as we do, but that does not mean they are lost to us. Programs or gimmicks won't engage them. Substance will. That's what they hunger for. Shaping a just and compassionate world has been the backbone of our Jewish tradition for the past 3,000 years. Tikkun Olam is the largest doorway through which we, our children and grandchildren and generations yet to be, can build Jewish lives of depth and commitment. Friends, We've got a badly fractured olam to tikkun. God is counting on us. What are we waiting for? Thank you.
Please welcome Executive Committee member who hails from the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, New Jersey, Jacqueline Levine.
Thank you so much, everyone. I come from the wonderful Federation of Greater Metro West. And I thank them for their support of me over these many years. This is my 48th consecutive General Assembly. You may ask why. Sometimes I even ask myself, but I know the answer. It's because to me, a GA is the apotheosis of community. This is where we all are, all of us from the federations of North America. And this is where the action is. I've always felt, even though in some far distant years of GAs, they have been less than inspiring. I'm not afraid to tell the truth now. Nonetheless, I always came home with something that I tried to bring back to my community or to the agency I chaired or whatever my main interest was at the time. And I know that this GA will be the same. I'm a fulfilled and very fortunate woman. I've tried to lead my life as Rabbi Jacobs just spoke to you about. I believe deeply that I have to follow the mandates of our prophets to seek peace and justice, equality and freedom, and to do that through dual prisms. The prism of the particular, taking care of ourselves, Jews in America, the United States, in Canada, in the former Soviet Union, in Israel, in every land of which we are a part, but also to care about all humankind. When I was young, and that's quite a while ago, and my daughter was very young, 1958, she was 7, we picketed the Woolworths in downtown Newark because it refused to seat blacks at its lunch counters. Thanks. Not long after that was the now to observe its 50th anniversary next year, the remarkable March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. My darling husband Howard, who's here with me today, my mother and I went to Washington. And there, our rabbi, Joachim Prinz, a great man in 2 countries, in Germany, where he sermonized, he had been jailed by Hitler, he sermonized and told the Jews to get out. And we've met people in Israel who say they're only alive because they heeded Rabbi Prinz. He was the only Jew to speak at the March on Washington. And he delivered a remarkable oration, The Evil of Silence, which would be long remembered. I mean, we remember it. However, the whole world doesn't, because immediately after that, Martin Luther King arose and he said, "I have a dream." Now, "I have a dream" is known about by every school child and people in far distant lands. It was a remarkable day. And it impelled me, not too long after that, to go to Selma, Alabama, and go on the march led by Dr. King from Selma to Montgomery. That was I don't know that I deserve applause. I had to do it. It was within me that I had to be part of that. As Rabbi Abraham Yahshua Heschel, who was with us, said, "When I marched in Selma, my feet were praying." It was a pivotal moment in my life. As you know, two very brave young Jewish boys were killed, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, and a young black associate of theirs, James Chaney, and also a woman, Viola Liuzzo. It was a wonderful day, but it was a terrible time. And something, of course, the world will never forget, and I certainly will never forget. I've continued my caring and my search for peace and justice, equality and freedom. I've been to Israel 30 times, part of Black Jewish Dialogues, part of Palestinian American and Jewish American Women's Dialogues. We together went to Gaza and Israel. I've been in many other dialogues over these many years. And my wonderful federation honored me by making me a Kipnis Wilson Friedland awardee. In other words, it has been a very fulfilling life. I thank you so much for allowing me to tell you of my search for perfection of the world, tikkun olam, everything that we all believe in together. Thank you so much. It's now my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Kathy Manning, Chair of the Board of the Jewish Federations of North America.
Good afternoon. Jackie, that was so terrific. I have to thank you. And I have to say that I don't know whether to feel deprived or embarrassed that my long involvement with the Jewish community has not involved any prison time. Today, for me, marks the end of a journey that began more than 20 years ago when I attended my first UJA Young Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C., and heard a young woman named Marina Furman tell us what it was like to be a refusenik living in the Soviet Union. And her story was so compelling that when she told us we had an opportunity to help the Soviet Jews leave their land of oppression, I decided I had to help. And the phone call that I made to my Federation Executive Director started me on a path that I never would have been able to imagine. By chairing my community's Operation Exodus campaign, I became part of something much larger than myself, much larger than my community. I became part of a national federation system that has helped hundreds of thousands of Jews around the globe. One of the things that I learned during my involvement in the federation system is that no one can predict where there will be Jews facing disaster. But what we can predict is that wherever there are Jews in trouble, the federation system will be there to help them. From the Soviet Union to Ethiopia, from Argentina to Sderot, from Biloxi to New Orleans, and today from New York to New Jersey. Our federation is there, bringing people to safety, providing assistance, and helping rebuild lives and communities. Jerry Levin talked a moment ago about the extraordinary work that we are able to do in New York because we have a federation system in place. And I want to talk to you for a minute about another situation where we were able to help because we had a federation system in place. In July of 2006, as I was taking on my first big leadership role in the federation as treasurer of JFNA, I went on our national campaign chair and director's mission. I wanted to see what kind of training and experience we were providing to our campaign chairs from across the country. And what I saw was really amazing. I saw firsthand how our federation system works with our wonderful partners, the Jewish Agency for Israel and the JDC, to help Jewish life blossom in areas where Judaism was all but destroyed by communism. We visited a summer camp where hundreds of Jewish children learned about the cities and culture and customs of Israel and got their first taste of Jewish life. We went with Hesed workers to visit the poor, homebound elderly, bringing them food packages to supplement their meager diets. We visited a Jewish community center where we saw what I called the Bubby Zadie Choir, singing with great gusto songs that I remember my great-grandmother singing. And we saw preschoolers and teenagers learning Israeli dances and making challah covers and menorahs. Everywhere we went, we saw Jewish life returning after a 60-year slumber. And then as we were boarding our plane to go to Israel, our security advisor, Yehuda, pulled me aside to tell me that there were rockets raining down over the border from Lebanon in a skirmish. We didn't know that what we were flying into would become the Second Lebanon War. And when we arrived in Israel, I was whisked into an emergency meeting with then Jewish Agency Chair Zev Bielski. He and his staff had created a plan to bring all the children out of the north of Israel into the center of the country, where they were going to create summer camps in the vacant university dorm rooms. But they needed our help to cover the cost of this massive effort. They needed $1 million. So we got on an emergency conference call with the executive directors of our largest federations. And the moment Zev finished his explanation, John Ruskay said, "New York's in." And Steve Nassiter said, "Chicago's in." And Steve Hoffman said, "Cleveland's in." And Detroit, and LA, and Miami, until someone spoke up and said, "I don't think $1 million is the right number. I think we ought to be committing to $2 million, because we don't know how long this skirmish is going to continue, and we want to make sure you don't have to worry about what to do with those children if this conflict drags on." Just like that, the Jewish Federation stepped up to help in a time of need without any hesitation. It was, for me, an absolutely breathtaking moment that I will never forget. 2 days later, I was in a minivan going to Nahariya, a town just a few miles south of the Lebanon border, to visit with Israelis who had spent the last couple days living in bomb shelters. And our first visit was to an Ethiopian absorption center. And when we got out of the minivan to go greet the new Olim, we saw children and mothers with infants being taken out of the absorption center and put into vans that had just driven up. "Where are they going?" I asked. They were being taken to the middle of the country, to these summer camps that we had just agreed to fund. That's how quickly we were able to get them out of harm's way. And in all the weeks that we read about the horrors of the Second Lebanon War, we never read about Israeli children being killed or being injured. Why? Because we, the American Jews and the Israelis, were able to work together to bring those children to an area of safety out of harm's way. When I started my journey all those years ago at the Young Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C., I never could have imagined that I would become part of a collective that works so effectively, so passionately, and so optimistically to help Jews around the world and to build and support the State of Israel. Today, as Israel faces new challenges, we're fighting the delegitimization movement with our new Israel Action Network, and we're addressing poverty and the growing religious divide in Israel with programs that support education and employment opportunities. And we're working with Birthright and Masah and Hillel, and with new Tikkun Olam programs to create a generation of younger Jews who feel connected to Israel and to our global Jewish community. And we will continue to work with enhanced energy, with greater focus, and with innovation through our new global planning table. Some say the federation system is an old model that won't survive because today's donors are more independent, less connected to Israel, less connected to the Jewish community. Well, I have to tell you, I don't believe that for a minute. I've seen how we come together as a federation system in times of need and in times of joy. I've seen how Jews of all ages find meaning in the work we do together as a community. I've seen how young Jews react when they return from their first trip to Israel. I've seen how next-gen Jews react to the opportunities presented by TribeFest. I have seen the passion and the camaraderie of 1,700 women standing together at our recent Lion Conference in New York. And I've seen the pride on the faces of our mission participants as they see firsthand what we do for the elderly in the former Soviet Union and for new immigrants in Israel. I believe that the secret of the Jewish community's success is our ability to act together as a federation system. And when we do act together, we don't just do good work, we change lives. My own life has been indelibly changed by my involvement with the federation system. This is the last time I will be addressing you as the chair of the board of the JFNA. And I want to tell you that this has been the greatest job I could ever imagine. I have been privileged to visit communities all across the country and all around the globe, where I have met caring people who are making a real difference with the work they do every day. I want to thank you for an incredible journey, for allowing me to be part of such a remarkable Jewish family. And I can't wait to see the incredible things we do together in the future. Thank you all.
Please welcome Senior Political Analyst for CNN, David Gergen.
I've had the opportunity over the last few years to address a number of federations around the country. And this is the first time with such a large gathering. But I want to express to you a debt of gratitude as I come here today, and perhaps you can understand it if I tell you just for a couple of minutes part of my story. About 40 years ago, I was actually working in the White House as a young kid for President Nixon. And I had the privilege of going with him on his last foreign journey when he went to the Middle East. And of a morning, I was on Air Force One, not sitting up front, sitting somewhere toward the back. But in any event, and the president had decided to go to Damascus, the first American president to go to Syria. I was sitting next to our Assistant Secretary for the Middle East, Roy Atherton, and suddenly he looked out the right wing as we were passing into Syrian territory. He looked out the right wing, and there was a MiG Syrian jet. And then he looked out on our left wing and said, oh my God, there's a MiG jet on our left wing as well. Well, our captain noticed, and he thought they were very dangerous, and that we were in a 747, and he immediately went into evasive action. And he went straight down, trying to get away from these jets, and then began swerving the plane to one side and another. And all of us were thrown onto the floor and were rolling around, and I turned to Roy Atherton and I said, how far away is the Sixth Fleet? He says, it's too far, we're done. And for about a minute, it seemed like an eternity, all of us thought this was the end, that we were going to be shot out of the sky. And then word came from the ground that Hafez al-Assad had sent up a welcoming party. And it just neglected to tell the Americans, welcome to the Middle East. That was my introduction to the Middle East. But it was only part of my introduction because it was on that trip, as we went from country to country and nation to nation, and I looked down as we were flying toward their capitals, And all I saw was desert and poverty, just really barren lands that had not been developed. And then we flew to a special place called Israel. And as we flew in, it was like a garden that was there in the desert. And from that moment forward, I have become someone who has believed we can never let this disappear. It's too precious to mankind. The innovation, the vitality, the spirit of those people has something that has continued to impress me to this day. A second chapter of my life and my introduction and understanding of the Jewish faith came when I met Les and Abigail Wexner from Columbus, the Wexner Foundation. As you know, the Wexner Foundation is well represented here and has done extraordinarily good works within the Jewish community. But it's also reached beyond the Jewish community, and I met them in the context they were citizens and philanthropists who were sponsoring a program at Harvard for Israeli fellows to come. But they wanted to start a center on leadership, on public leadership, because they believed that business schools prepared people to become CEOs, but there was no one who was out there preparing leaders to serve the common good. And they became the chief driving forces behind that center, and I have had the privilege of being the director for the last decade. And time and time again, they have stepped up. They have brought other Jewish philanthropists in, and we now have a small army. We just had a meeting with David Rubenstein and Glenn Dubin and the Wexners, and I looked around the room and I thought, wow, all of our major donors are Jewish. Mort Zuckerman, another one. And at the Kennedy School at Harvard, there are 5 buildings. Every single building is named after a Jewish philanthropist. Every single building. And that introduced me to, and has made me understand the generosity of the Jewish community, which is something I think is also remarkable and of which you ought to be awfully proud. And the success of the federations depends upon the continuing generosity of so many here. My larger point is, look, this Iranian question could be the toughest problem we've had. Bob Gates told me before he left office, I've been in office in and out of government for 30 years. This is the toughest problem I've ever seen. There are no good solutions. And there is a serious possibility that we could have a crisis in U.S.-Israeli relations. That we could have another Suez, in effect, because we're not together on this. Yes, at a strategic level, we have been doing a lot with the Israelis. Yes, we have helped to build up strategic defenses. Yes, the Obama administration has got a much better record than the Republicans were charging in this campaign. But even so, the relationship is not what it should be heading toward the Iranian crisis. Thank you very much.
Please welcome musical artist from Chicago, Illinois, Idan.
Many nights we've prayed with no proof anyone could hear. In our hearts a hopeful song we barely understood. No, we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. There can be miracles when you believe, though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. What miracles you can achieve when you believe, somehow you will. You will when you believe. No, in this time of fear, when prayer so often in vain, hope seemed like the summer bird too swiftly flown away. Yet now I'm standing here, my heart's so full I can't explain, seeking faith and speaking words I never thought I'd say. can't see your way safe through the rain. A small but still resilient voice says love is very near. Oh, there can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Oh, who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe. Somehow you will. You will when you believe. No, you will when you believe.
Please welcome Chair for JFNA's National Women's Philanthropy, Gail Norrie.
I am honored to be the chair of National Women's Philanthropy, but I actually stand before you today not just as a fellow volunteer and donor, but also as a recipient of Federation services. In December of 1984, during Shabbat services, I heard about a secret airlift of Ethiopian Jews. I was a sophomore at Barnard College. We were told that we could bring contributions to certain dorms on Sunday morning that would go toward a special rescue campaign. When I brought my check that Sunday, I met my husband, Elliot Norrie, for the first time. I was making my very first gift to a UJA Federation campaign, but Elliot had been involved his whole life. He learned about helping Jews all over the world, set by the example of his grandparents and parents in Rochester, New York. When Elliot and I moved to Philadelphia and started a family, we naturally reached out to the Federation. Shortly after our second child, Ben, turned 2, the director of our synagogue preschool called me into his office. He said, Ben beat to his own drum and rarely sat for circle time. Ben was learning to read just from watching Sesame Street, but I had noticed that it was difficult to make eye contact with him, and he had trouble answering questions about his day when I picked him up from preschool. So I agreed to meet with a developmental pediatrician. When the doctor told us her diagnosis that Ben was autistic, in an instant, my entire world changed. How was I going to help him? What therapies and support services would he need? Where could he go to school? To say that my plans for him were derailed would be an understatement. Fortunately, a friend told me about a preschool program for kids with special needs at another nearby synagogue, started with seed money from the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. Those first few months were challenging, but Ben made tremendous progress. By the time Ben was in pre-K, he was even mainstreamed for most of the day with the support of an aide. It was our dream that Ben would be able to attend the Jewish day school, just like our daughter Dahlia. I had heard that the school was not very accommodating to kids with learning differences, but they had just hired a new headmaster, and I had been asked to go on the board of directors. The new headmaster had been involved with starting a program for kids with special needs at his prior school in Chicago. So I approached him after the very first board meeting either of us had ever attended to see if he would be willing to do the same thing in Philly. We visited the program in Chicago, and I was so impressed that I asked our Federation exec to partner with us in beginning a program to enable children with special needs to attend Jewish day school throughout Philadelphia. Orot, the Hebrew word for lights, started the following year with 2 children in one of our day schools. Today, 15 years later, Orot has almost 50 children enrolled in 5 Jewish day schools in Philadelphia. This week is the 8th anniversary of Ben's bar mitzvah, Parshat Toldot. That day, he read from the Torah and Haftorah, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. In his Dvar Torah, he spoke about Jacob and Esau, and that every child needs to be nurtured according to their strengths and abilities. Ben just celebrated his 21st birthday and is in his 3rd year at a college program in New York studying animal science. My story is only one example of how our collective works together in a seamless way to provide cradle-to-grave services in communities. That is what Federation is all about. JFNA works with each of us to uphold our mandate of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. Each of us is responsible one for another. Our family is eternally grateful to the Federation, and we can't imagine what Ben's life would be like today without your help. Thank you.
Please welcome President and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, Jerry Silverman.
Got to figure out what time it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I have to say my daughter is on a bus coming down from the Galil right now. She's on a Masa program. Naomi, I love you. Thanks for watching. Today's a very meaningful day for our family. It's the 9th Yortzeit commemorating the passing of my mother, Friedel bat Reb Noach v'Tzipora Miriam. My mother worked for the incredible Jewish Federation of Cleveland. She was a very strong woman, and she didn't have an easy life. She brought us up instilling sound and solid values, values that live on in all her children, grandchildren, and even her great-grandchild, who is a Sabra. She believed in Jewish family. She believed in community. She was a passionate Zionist. She believed in helping those in need, and she believed in continuous Jewish education throughout our lives. Sound familiar? You know, during my career in the private sector, I had the opportunity to work with timeless, classic, and very successful brands with strategic approaches to change. We always had to innovate while at the same time remaining committed to our core customer. I believe the same is absolutely true for Jewish federations. Our mission of living chesed, chinuch, and Klal Yisrael is taking place across North America and the world. Does it look the same? Not necessarily. Are there variations in how communities work with our amazing agencies, both locally and globally? Of course. But at its core, the fundamentals are the same. And a huge, huge thank you to Baltimore Jewish community. What a great GA you've thrown. To the Fiedlers, to the Hurwitzes, to Mark Terrell, and to Michelle Gordon, you've been outstanding leaders and partners. Thank you so much.
I have the best job in the world, though admittedly sometimes it's tough. I have to describe the monumental challenges facing Israel on a daily basis. I have to talk about the tens of thousands of terrorist rockets that are aimed at our homes every single day. 120 of those rockets struck in Israel just this week, and I know I speak on behalf of all of us here, and are extending our heartfelt wishes to the more than 1 million Israelis who are the targets of those terrorist rockets. Meanwhile, the entire Middle East continues to roil around us, and the Iranian centrifuges continue to spin. I have to explain how Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government and the Israel Defense Forces are grappling with these threats and defending the people of Israel every day. But I also get to talk about the miracles that are occurring around us every day. The fact that Israel is one of the healthiest and happiest and most educated societies in the world. Half of our universities are listed among the top 100 universities in the world. We reclaim a greater percentage of our water than any country on earth. We conserve one of the largest shares of our territory for nature, and we help feed an increasingly hungry planet. I get to talk about the Technion invention that allows paraplegics to stand up and walk upstairs, and even to complete a marathon walking. Last year at the GA, I told you that Israel is now exporting wine to France. This year, I get to tell you that we are exporting caviar and Olympic snowmaking machines to Russia. We must participate in more programs, such as Federation's Reverse Mifgash, that brings together Israeli and American Jewish youth, or the Hartman Institute's I Engage, which seeks to establish a new value-based covenant between Israeli and American Jews. We must seek to do tikkun olam not as isolated communities, but as Am Yisrael, in programs such as IsraAid, where Israeli and American Jews join in helping disaster victims around the world. IsraAid was also on the scene in Sandy-stricken New Jersey and New York. What a profound impression they made. Before criticizing, we must pause to clarify, to understand, and above all, to listen. I have the best job in the world. This is our time. This is our test. Our future, the future of the Jewish people, is ours alone to forge. Thank you. Done.
I am honored to welcome Elie Wiesel and Natan Sharansky.
Yeah.
The March on Washington was a larger-than-life event at which over 250,000 Jews from all over the nation congregated at a rally during the Washington summit between President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. The march itself was the culmination of a several-decade-long struggle to free Soviet Jews. And in 1987, this was likely the most critical issue facing world Jewry. I'm honored to be here with two great visionaries of our time, both of whom played key roles in the struggle, and what I believe is one of the most significant stories of contemporary Jewish history. To put it in context, the movement to free Soviet Jews represents a critical watershed event in both Jewish and American history. More simply, this is a story of a group of people fighting for their rights as Jews and as human beings. They sacrificed everything for the right to their identity, fighting against what seemed like impossible odds. And in the process, they inspired an international solidarity movement that crossed all political and religious lines. And while fighting for their freedom, they changed the world. Historians may argue about the many factors that led to the ultimate implosion of the evil empire, but many of us who have studied the movement believe that it played a major role. Its success meant the rescue and ultimate emigration of over 1 million Soviet Jews to Israel, transforming Israeli society, but it was no less significant for American Jews. To quote Yossi Klein Halevi, the Soviet Jewry movement roused them from their passivity and taught them how to fight a diaspora-generated struggle and experience victory, not vicariously through Israeli heroism, but as active partners in their people's fate. American Jews came to see themselves as a major force for Jewish freedom and security, protecting endangered Jews through political means. Professor Wiesel, in 1965, you went on a trip to the Soviet Union, which you documented upon your return in your book, The Jews of Silence. At the time, very few Westerners were aware of what was happening to Jews behind the Iron Curtain. Who sent you on this journey, and what did you find in Russia?
I had a friend called Meir Rosen. We met in Paris. I was studying philosophy and he was studying law. And we remained friends afterwards in New York, where he was a consul and I was who I was. And he one day said to me, look, you should go to Russia. I had no idea why. So it was Meir Rosen, who then was in charge at the Israeli consulate in New York, in charge of the case of Soviet Jewry. And that's how it began. He wanted to pay for my trip, although I was poor, very poor, but I didn't want that. I said, if it's a mitzvah, I felt it as a mitzvah, a commandment, I should be paying for it myself. And it changed my life.
What happened? What did you find there?
Well, I came there and I was taken in the hands of a man, maybe you know him, David Bartov. He was then the number 2 man at the embassy, but the number 1 dealing with Soviet Jewry. And look, he took me everywhere. Mainly we met, of course, in the beginning in the synagogue, then in cemeteries. In the synagogue we met with old people, in the cemeteries with young people. That was the only place where they could come and speak. And again, it changed my life. I didn't know when I was going that when I would come back, I would consider myself as their messenger. And their messenger I became, day after day after day.
Natan, when I was working on my film Refusenik, I was often challenged by people who said, well, everyone in the Soviet Union had it bad, and nobody could leave the Soviet Union. So what was the situation specifically of Jews in the Soviet Union? Why was their situation somehow special or different?
Well, if you go to those days that Eli went there, and it was really before any struggle started. Everybody suffered in the Soviet Union. Everybody was deprived of freedom. But Jews were also deprived of their identity. There was no, one after another, all the schools where you could study Hebrew was closed. Then one after another, every school where you could study Yiddish was closed. Then Jewish theater was closed. Then Jewish writers were arrested and disappeared. So when I was growing in the Soviet Union, and I was a young boy in those days that Eli came to Soviet Union, there was nothing that you can touch in your past, in your heritage, in your culture, in your religion, nothing. But at the same time, you know that you're a Jew because it is what's written in the ID of your parents. And so all the conversations at home are about discrimination, about restrictions, about career which you cannot make, in university which you cannot be accepted. And somehow everybody knows that somewhere in the past you had some relatives who are now abroad, but you're not supposed to speak about it. You're afraid to mention it. So you're isolated, you're disconnected, you have no identity, you have no values except how to succeed somehow to adjust yourself to the system. That was the situation of Russian Jews who felt themselves absolutely abandoned.
Why you think this story is not so well remembered by the young generations?
The march, when you say the march in Washington, what comes to mind? The black community. And for me, the march to Washington was our march, which was a great march. I remember both of us spoke there. And you know, we have done this kind of thing so often, both Nathan and I, but it was special.
I feel like I'm in Israel already, don't you? Let's stay there just a little bit longer as we close this final plenary with some help from a very talented group of Israeli musicians appearing courtesy of the American Israel Cultural Foundation, the Mika Hari Quartet.
La 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 בערב יום שבת שחר משתש וכל אחד כמעט שוב מתחדש
בכל 7 ימים המקלחות שרות, המים שוב חמים בצינורות. שביל באמצע, שביל בצד, חפופים אחד אחד, איזה ניקיון וסדר, איזה יופי של מצעד. שביל באמצע, שביל בצד, חפופים אחד אחד, איזה ניקיון וסדר, איזה יופי של מצעד. מים וסבון, חשמל דופק שעון, ולא עושים חשבון עם החשבון. מי בושם לפנים וחולצת שבת יפה, וזוג של לבנים להחלפה. שביל באמצע, שביל בצד, חפופים אחד אחד, איזה ניקיון וסדר, איזה יופי של מצעד.